Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. Apologies for the slight delay. I'm Robert Colville, Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. I will be popping up throughout the day to act as sort of compare Master of Ceremonies figure, but my most important duty right at the moment is to remind you all that the Wi-Fi code here is username GHallEvents, password GHallEvents, all one word, in capitals. Very important that, in capitals. And now it is my great honour to welcome the Chairman of the Centre for Policy Studies, Lord Saatchi.
Welcome to you all. Welcome, everybody. Yes, I'm Lord Saatchi. I'm the chairman of this august institution. And I would like, if I may, on behalf of the whole of the distinguished board of the Centre for Policy Studies, the outstanding team from the CPS, the UK Foreign Office, the US State Department, the US Embassy, and Ambassador Johnson, I'd like to thank you all and to welcome you here today. I'd particularly like, if I may, to thank the City of London Corporation and its chief, Catherine McGuinness. Catherine McGuinness and the City of London Corporation has inaugurated these CPS conferences here in this historic setting, and it's been a marvellous partnership for many years now, and so wonderful to see you all. I can see, looking at the faces, that quite a few of you were at the at Lancaster House for the Margaret Thatcher lecture just a short time ago, which was delivered, as you know, by the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and introduced by our Foreign Secretary and potential Prime Minister, Jeremy Hunt. So thank you to you, Catherine, and to the corporation. My particular thanks also to the Daily Telegraph, to Raytheon, to Aston Martin, and to all our great friends and supporters who are in the room today. This Centre for Policy Studies Margaret Thatcher Conference on Britain and America will bring together, I hope to your satisfaction, the leading thinkers, writers, diplomats, and political leaders to consider whether the special relationship will survive and thrive or become a footnote in global affairs. A word about the CPS and the background to this conference, if I may. Times change. A new world order is emerging, but nobody knows its shape. Perceptions change. All of us know that the sensations produced by the same object can vary with the circumstances. Lukewarm water will appear hot to a cold hand and cold to a hot hand. Colors look very different under a microscope. Even the sun in the heavens we see only as it was 8 minutes before. So after 2,000 years of human progress, it seems, doesn't it, that the real nature of things remains as inaccessible as it was to Aristotle. He noted that fire burns both here and in Persia, but what is thought just changes before our very eyes. The decision, he says, rests with perception. In the end, all attempts to place politics or economics within the canons of scientific objectivity have failed. There remains an irremediable tentativeness about the logically perplexing question of what is real. Maybe this explains it best. One of Tom Stoppard's characters explained, although it appeared to a casual observer standing on the platform at Paddington Station that the train had left Paddington. In fact, as he writes, all the observable phenomena indicated that Paddington had left the train. If I drop this paper, it will fall to the ground. tomorrow the sun will rise. We can make such scientific statements, perhaps without finality, but with a certain plausibility. But in politics, it seems that once we say what we perceive in terms of what we feel, what we believe, once we express opinions or beliefs or attempt to offer explanations or descriptions or forecasts, then error, doubt, and uncertainty come to the fore. The closest politics seems to come to science is the chaos theory of mathematics, the most potent symbol of which is the butterfly that flaps its wings over the Amazon rainforest and sets off an electrical storm over Chicago. But the next time it flaps its wings, nothing happens. Politics has not yet found its Newton. And yes, my friends, the closest we have to Newton is the Centre for Policy Studies. That's what Mrs. Thatcher founded it for. She knew that the British electorate is by far the most sophisticated in the world, and that the winner of a British general election is the one with the best arguments, not the prettiest face. So, at the CPS today, we share a pastoral desire to lead the flock, that's you, to lead the flock to higher ground and better pasture. With touching enthusiasm, we associate the CPS first with the good of the country, and finally, the whole planet. To those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, these well-mannered and illuminating CPS conferences and lectures bear witness that the place is overwhelmingly occupied by intelligent and responsible people, honestly striving by their own best lights to pursue the aims for which the place stands. Many of them are my heroes. They're here today. They organized this event. Some of them, a few of them, are future prime ministers who will, like Mrs. Thatcher, prospect for real ideas with the unremitting zeal of a prospector hunting gold. That's what we're here for today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I would like to introduce you to start the events today to Catherine McGuinness. And one word before Catherine comes up, or do come up, Catherine, as Catherine comes up. The City of London Corporation under Catherine doesn't just manage the estate, obviously one of the greatest in the world. Catherine is also crucially involved in what's going to happen to London and to this pinnacle of the financial services world after the word which we're not going to mention. And here is Catherine McGuinness. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Maurice, and good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to Guildhall, the home of the City of London Corporation, of which I am Policy Chair. Now, those who wonder what a Policy Chair does and how that compares with the Lord Mayor, I am effectively the political leader of this organisation. Were we a borough, I would be the borough leader. The Lord Mayor is... Well, he likes to think that he is the president and I am the prime minister, but as she has felt a little beleaguered these last few months, I'm not sure I share the analogy. But we work very closely together to ensure that both the financial related professional services sector, which carries our name, the city, but also this place itself is as well represented as it can be, both at home and abroad, particularly in these interesting times. And we really are delighted to be hosting the Centre for Policy Studies Margaret Thatcher Conference once again. Maurice, this is a partnership that we have very much valued. And it's great to be doing this 40 years after Mrs. Thatcher's election as Prime Minister. I'm sure many of you, like me, have been watching the recent BBC documentary with interest and will have been reminded of the extraordinary times that she presided over, a time of turbulence and change from which the UK emerged with the characteristic resilience and innovative spirit which I'm sure will carry us through these turbulent times of our own. Now, as many of you will know, we have a statue of Margaret Thatcher here in this building, near the Guildhall Art Gallery, although unfortunately that area is sadly not publicly accessible at the moment. And such was the strength of feeling that she engendered while in office that I'm afraid to say that our statue was beheaded by a protester shortly after installation, a source of great embarrassment to us. But it was quickly repaired, and it now simply has a few elegant wrinkles to show for the adventure, wrinkles not unbefitting for a lady of the age at which she was depicted. And she visited Guildhall many times when she was Prime Minister, including in 1988, where she spoke in this very hall alongside President Ronald Reagan. At that time, when we were approaching the end of the Cold War, the President hailed the critical alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States and spoke of the hope of a new era in human history and, hopefully, an era of peace and freedom for all. Of course, the Soviet Union has gone, at least in the form it then took. But unfortunately, the UK and the US have had to face a number of new threats together in the years since, and our strong friendship has stood the test of time. Ronald Reagan also joked that it was comforting to speak in a building that was so much older than himself. And it may not surprise you that the City of London's links with the United States go back a long way. The first settlement at Jamestown was made by the Virginia Company of London, which had been established by royal charter and was headed by Sir Thomas Smythe, a former sheriff of the City of London. And for any of you who are liverymen, we elected the forthcoming sheriffs in this very hall yesterday. The Mayflower was also registered in London and set off from London before going to Plymouth. And the historical influences of our relationship are still visible. It's said that the dome of the Capitol building in Washington is based on that of St. Paul's Cathedral here in the city. So, Mrs. Thatcher was right to observe that the City of London and all it stands for are part of America's heritage as well as ours. And from those times to the present day, the flow of trade, money, and of course people from London, between London and the United States have been very strong. Actually, even including my own family, as my mother came from Connecticut. And this is underpinned by many things. It's underpinned not only by shared language and culture, for example, but also by a shared legal framework, a framework which enables trade and innovation. Today, London and New York have a friendly rivalry as the two leading global financial centres of the world. And while the rankings sometimes change, it's notable that these two cities are consistently at the top. And of course, the economic relationship between the US and the UK is very strong. We're the biggest investors in each other's countries, and that two-way investment directly provides over 1 million jobs in each of the two countries. I think we have jobs generated by the UK in every state of the US. Looking at Duncan, British American Business, who's nodding, so I must be right. At the moment, demand from the United States is the strongest driver of UK export growth. And so it will come as no surprise that we in the City Corporation engage very closely with our counterparts in the US. I've been to Washington and to New York in the last couple of months, and our Lord Mayor is visiting Atlanta and Chicago this very week. And what we hear is a lot of goodwill towards the UK, a lot of goodwill and commitment to that special relationship, and certainly a desire for deeper dialogue and alignment on regulatory issues. But I have to say we also do hear continued puzzlement over where the UK is going on Brexit, another thing which probably unites us on both sides of the Atlantic just at the moment. And understandably, the view from the US that we hear is that they need to wait and see until the UK-EU relationship is settled before we get on to the details of a UK-US free trade agreement. I'm very confident that any future free trade agreement would only strengthen that special relationship further. But saying that, there is no point having a free trade agreement just for the sake of a free trade agreement, and any future agreement must have financial services at its heart and must lay the framework for greater cooperation on developing the international regulatory landscape. At this time when we see more fragmentation around the world, it's particularly important that we two countries with shared values, a common legal framework, should be influencing how the global regulatory framework is shaped. We have a great field of speakers with us today to explore this special relationship further, to discuss the economic relationship, the political relationship, and the security relationship between our two countries. Something I'm sure that we all reflected on during the recent commemorations of the 75th anniversary of D-Day. As Her Majesty the Queen observed during President Trump's state visit, not only did American and British forces lead the way in liberating Europe, but the US and the UK also led the way in building the multilateral institutions and international order which kept the peace after the war. As we see that international order challenged in new ways, it is clear that the relationship between the US and the UK will be as important now as it was then. And to go back to Mrs. Thatcher when she spoke here at Guildhall, she quoted Churchill, who wrote of Britain and America, "Where we are able to stand together and work together for righteous causes, we shall always be thankful and the world will always be free." We'll need to work very hard to ensure that that remains true in the years to come. I look forward to hearing from all our speakers today. I would just like to check if we have our, yeah, we do. I really look forward to hearing from all our speakers today, and I am delighted to introduce the Secretary of State for International Trade. Delighted because I was told I had to keep talking until he arrived. And you may notice I'm down to my last piece of paper, but I'm particularly delighted because he is a great friend of the city and a great champion of the transatlantic relationship. So can we please welcome Dr. Liam Fox.
May I introduce a great friend of mine. We were co-chairman of the Conservative Party during one of its many tremendous periods, and I'm thrilled to see you, Liam, and we're all looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Morris.
Here is Liam Fox.
Good afternoon. When Margaret Thatcher entered number 10 for the first time, 40 years ago, Britain was a very different place. Those who cannot remember it would find it almost unrecognizable. For many voters, especially younger voters, it means that they have no idea of the destruction that a real socialist government can bring. I had just started studying medicine at university, and I remember the sense of optimism that the Thatcher victory brought. We had seen unemployment treble in the year before that election. We'd seen inflation reach 28%. Punitive taxes had led to a brain drain with some of our top wealth creators abandoning our shores. The trade union barons told us when we could and could not have our public services delivered, with mounds of household waste decaying on our streets. Britain's international influence diminished as the world watched in horror and disbelief at the sad and desperate plight of our country. And we lived in the shadow of fear of the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. Across the Atlantic, the United States still struggled with the aftermath of the oil shock and the Vietnam War. And the doomed Carter administration seemed unable to rally the spirit of America. This was all to change. In 2011, I was fortunate enough as Secretary of State for Defense to be asked to speak at the Ronald Reagan Centennial Dinner And I spoke about the President's relationship with Mrs. Thatcher. At a time when leadership was so needed, they brought values, vision, and valor. For the Cold War did not just end, it was won. It was not an accident. It came about because the leadership of the free world was committed politically, militarily, and morally to the defeat of totalitarian ideology and the triumph of liberty and freedom. It was not an exercise in expediency, but the application of conviction. Of course, for generations, the transatlantic alliance has been built on our mutual security interests, our shared democratic values, and our commitment to take the lead in building a safer, more just, and more prosperous world. It is as true today as it was on D-Day 75 years ago, when American and British soldiers fought heroically alongside our other allies to liberate Western Europe from the scourge of fascist totalitarianism. And who could not have been moved watching the last of those veterans return recently to commemorate the sacrifices that have led to our collective freedom. It's perhaps understandable that the Thatcher-Reagan legacy tends to be remembered primarily in terms of defense and security. But equally transformative was its economic emphasis on opportunity and meritocracy at home, and a free market doctrine abroad that would become accepted as the Washington Consensus. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher understood that our strength lay in people, not governments, and that liberated from the dead hand of the state, the innovation and drive of free people would triumph. They believed that competition is to be welcomed, not feared, that it's the means by which we judge our talents one against the other without recourse to conflict. They knew what they believed to be right and had the courage to say so, and they knew what they believed to be wrong and had the fortitude to confront it. They knew that in a free society, the market works, that the combined wisdom of millions of individuals acting in their own interests is always likely to trump the wisdom of the self-selecting elites. They also had an abiding faith in the benefits of free trade. Margaret Thatcher described free trade as a force for peace, freedom, and political decentralization. Peace, because economic links between nations reinforce mutual understanding with mutual interest. Freedom, because trade between individuals bypasses the apparatus of the state and disperses power to customers, not planners. And political decentralization, because the size of the political unit is not dictated by the size of the market and vice versa. And in his State of the Union address in 1983, Ronald Reagan declared that as the leader of the West and as a country that has become great and rich because of economic freedom, America must be an unrelenting advocate of free trade. The joint leadership of the United States and the United Kingdom in the economic sphere that goes to the heart of our current prosperity today was kick-started, if not invented, in that era. Internationally, capitalism has been responsible for the greatest liberation of the world's poor in history. In the mid-1970s, 12% of the world's population lived on the equivalent of under $1 a day. Now that is close to 2%. Open markets, globalization, and trade deregulation have revolutionized the prospects of many of the world's most disadvantaged people, far more than any aid programs could ever manage. In 1986, President Reagan helped launch the Uruguay round of multilateral negotiations that led to the establishment of the World Trade Organization, which underpins our economic success. Since its foundation in 1995, the WTO has been shaped by successive British and American governments with a central proposition that competition and open markets are the way to drive productivity and competitiveness. That is why our nations were founding members of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1948 and the positive effect that these organizations have had is stunning. A paper published by IMF researchers in 2005 concluded that the WTO had a powerful and positive impact amounting to about 120% of additional world trade, or about $8 trillion in 2003 alone, relative to a world without either GATT or the WTO. And their achievements are not just about trade. Trade is about how we help spread prosperity. Prosperity underpins social cohesion. That social cohesion in its turn underpins political stability. And that political stability is the bedrock of our collective security. And I believe that our shared values and our enduring cooperation are the bedrock again upon which the special relationship itself is built. As for our bilateral economic ties, they are second to none. Our mutual investments are valued today at around $1 trillion. The US is the single biggest source of inward investment into the UK, accounting for more than a quarter of the overall total. And this investment is very much a two-way street. The United Kingdom is the United States' largest investor and our top destination for UK foreign direct investment, accounting for nearly a fifth of our overall total. Every morning, 1 million Americans go to work for UK firms in America, while 1 million Britons go to work for American firms here in the UK. The US is our largest single bilateral trading partner, worth over £190 billion last year, or around 15% of total UK trade. And this, incidentally, is up 4% on the previous 12 months. The latest figures from the Office for National Statistics show that goods exports to the United States increased by 11.9% to £56.7 billion in the 12 months to April. And in 2018, we exported more than £63 billion worth of services. The US accounts for 18.6% of our total exports as a country, while at the same time, the United Kingdom is a top 5 export market in 33 US states, supporting jobs across America. The efforts made to deregulate markets, free up the movement of capital, and remove barriers to trade have created the economic opportunities that we enjoy today. And I believe that our relationship with the United States is as strong now as ever it was. And I was therefore personally delighted to meet with President Trump during his successful state visit to the United Kingdom. So what does the future hold? Well, as a first step, we've been working to ensure that there is no disruption to our trade relationship as we leave the European Union. This includes the signing of a mutual recognition agreement confirming both governments' commitment to maintaining all relevant aspects of the current EU-US agreement. We've also signed other agreements with the US, including on wine, spirits, and marine equipment to ensure continuity as we leave the EU. But going beyond continuity, I believe there is a real appetite to strengthen our already special relationship even further once we leave the EU through a bold and ambitious free trade agreement. Positive and productive conversations are taking place to create the environment for a free trade agreement, in particular through the UK-US Trade and Investment Working Group. This has now met 5 times since Ambassador Lighthizer and I set it up in the summer of 2017. And both the UK and US governments have been progressing our domestic work that we need to undertake to ensure that we're ready to start formal negotiations as soon as we leave the EU. The UK government has held a public consultation to inform our approach to a UK-US FTA. We received over 150,000 responses from the British public, and we'll be publishing a summary shortly. And we'll be publishing our objectives for a US-UK FTA before negotiations begin. Equally, we very much welcome the US government publishing their negotiating objectives for an FTA with the UK, and it's a clear demonstration of their commitment to beginning talks as soon as possible. An ambitious free trade agreement will make it even easier for the UK and US to trade with each other and invest in one another's economies. And it will do this while maintaining environmental protections and the high standards in food safety and animal welfare that our public rightly demand. And we will ensure that the rights of governments to regulate public services is maintained in line with recent international trade agreements. This will mean that rigorous protections, such as for the National Health Service, are upheld. Our position has been absolutely clear that the NHS is not and never will be for sale. As a doctor myself who trained in the NHS, you may say that this is a natural position for me to hold, but I know that it's also one that is shared by my colleagues on the Conservative front bench, including the two candidates vying to be our next Prime Minister. An ambitious FTA is a golden opportunity to support the flow of innovation and ideas in emerging technologies, such as AI and the Internet of Things, where the UK and the US already have world-leading capabilities. As two of the most innovative economies in the world, we should work together to shape the sectors of the future, from trade and services to fintech and data-driven technology. And this will benefit both the global economy and bring prosperity to our citizens. Not only will this be a boon for businesses and communities across our countries, but this free trade agreement could be a trailblazer, setting the global benchmark for how two leading economies can trade with one another. So I'm pleased that President Trump took the opportunity to underline his commitment to achieving this goal during his visit, emphasizing the possibilities for producers and consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. Just as we seek to expand free and open trade between our own economies, maximizing the potential for both producers and consumers, so we must do together globally. We must have the courage to seize the opportunities that lie before us and shape the world around us, based on our own abiding faith in the concept of free trade itself, as we did in the Thatcher-Reagan era. This country, the UK, has long been associated with both the concept and practice of free trade. A small island, perched on the edge of the European continent, became the leader of world trade. It was from here that those such as Adam Smith set out the intellectual case for free and open commerce, arguments that are just as valid today as they were in 1776 when he published The Wealth of Nations. And it's worth reminding ourselves of the positive narrative about trade and the improvement of the human condition that it's brought about. Because in the world around us, there is unfortunately a rising chorus of protectionism which threatens to drown out the case for a free and open global trading system. New barriers, many of them invisible, are emerging around the global economy, creating new impediments to the open commerce that is the lifeblood of global prosperity. And what is worse, many of these impediments are being introduced by G7 and G20 countries themselves, the very nations who have prospered most from the open liberal trading system of recent decades. Research by the OECD has shown how protectionist instincts have grown since the financial crisis of 2008. By 2010, G7 and G20 countries were estimated to be operating some 300 non-tariff barriers to trade. By 2015, this had mushroomed to over 1,200. Protectionism can be seductive, but it is a dangerous affair. I have described it as the Class A drug of the trading world. It can make you feel good at first, but it will prove disastrous in the long term. It is economically destructive, preventing us from reallocating global resources effectively. It is also socially regressive because those on lower incomes spend a higher proportion of their money on goods than services, and so tariffs and barriers will hurt the poor more. And we will all pay the price if those denied the opportunity of global prosperity turn their backs on the partnerships and cooperation that underpin global security. We all must ensure that those of us who have benefited from open and free trade do not pull up the drawbridge behind us and deny the same benefits to others, whatever generation and whatever part of the world they come from. For trade liberalization and integration have gone hand in hand with a boom of international trade, growing at an annual rate of some 8% a year since the fall of the Berlin Wall, with some of the biggest beneficiaries being developing economies. And this was underpinned by the creation of the World Trade Organization itself, shaped in large part by the United States and the United Kingdom. Now, the United Kingdom will soon regain our ability to conduct an independent trade policy for the first time in more than 40 years. And we will have the opportunity to bang the drum for reforming the global trading system at the WTO, advocating new measures to recognize the growing importance of trade in services and the urgent need for their liberalization. We believe in the rules-based global trading system with the WTO at its center, but we need to recognize the need to keep it up to date and relevant. For example, the pace of reform at WTO has failed to keep up with the demands of the information revolution. We can now carry the equivalent of whole bookstores on our mobile devices, downloading in seconds. And where once upon a time the exchange of goods practically defined trade, we now live in an emerging knowledge transfer-based trading world, where an engineering report, a 3D printer design, or new advances in machine learning can reduce or even eliminate the need for the physical transfer of goods. These are exciting times. The blurring of the line between a good and a service, the ever greater importance of the digital economy, and the gradual erosion of the relevance of geographical barriers is reshaping our world at a staggering pace. The WTO has estimated, however, that despite the fact that 2/3 of global GDP and employment is now in services, that barriers to trade in services today are just as great as they were to goods 50 years ago. IMF research suggests that liberalizing trade in services could add about $350 billion to G20 GDP in the long term. As a services-orientated economy and the world's second largest services exporter, this is clearly a key objective if we are to realize our potential as a truly global Britain. And research from the Bank of England suggests that if a large sample of trade partners lowered their services trade barriers to the level of the least restrictive country, the UK's current account deficit could fall by up to 15%. But when we think of how the world has changed, let's just consider this. In 1995, when the WTO was formed, the world of trade was hugely different. Imagine that back then, I had asked you the following question. If I sell you a digital code over the internet to make something on your 3D printer, have I sold you a good or a service? In 1995, the terms of the question itself would have meant almost nothing. And that is the scale of the challenge that we face. And the UK and the United States are in a unique position to drive the updated process that the international rules-based trading system requires to function more effectively, to create a level playing field so that the benefits can be enjoyed by everyone. This means reforming international institutions to prevent countries engaging in unfair trade practices, such as distortive subsidies or dumping. It means tackling issues concerning state-owned enterprises and strengthening the dispute settlement system. It means improving transparency so that we can see which businesses globally are genuinely private sector and those which merely act as a cover for the state, undermining the rules upon which free and fair trade are based. And it means removing barriers to trade by agreeing new rules for e-commerce and tackling obstacles to digital trade, such as data localization. Our two great nations have done so much down the generations to open up our markets, and those of us who genuinely believe in free trade have a duty to uphold these values. From helping create GATT out of the ashes of the Second World War to molding the World Trade Organization, our two countries have always led from the front as passionate advocates of global free trade. And we have always embraced the future as an opportunity, recognizing how and when to adapt existing systems, rules, and regulations to ever-changing circumstances. As President Reagan once said, "Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue." I have every confidence that America and the United Kingdom will continue that journey together, hand in hand, stronger together for ourselves and for the world around us. Thank you.